What's up, everybody? It is Wednesday, February the 14th, 2018. I'm so glad to be here with you guys this afternoon. I will be doing a spoiler review of the new Black Panther movie, which is coming out for most people in North America, which is coming out period in North America tomorrow. I have an early showing where I have tickets for the earliest showing, and I'm definitely looking forward to that movie. And I'm not going to be preemptive and say that it's my favorite Marvel movie so far, because I haven't seen it yet. But just based on what so many other people have said about the movie, I already know I'm going to like it. So be on the lookout for that. I'm going to do that Friday. That might be the last thing I touch on Friday after I get through some of the stories that I want to go over. I wanted to go over the story about, let me see if I can find it. The story about the statement that Jeff Sessions made about Anglo-American sheriffs and the history of the history of Anglo-American sheriffs within police departments. I'm going to save that for Friday, though. Because there are some other things that I want to touch on today, such as Trump's budget and how much of a disaster it's going to be for Americans. I want to touch on the recommended indictments for Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. I want to touch on, and I'm going to touch on, an article that I just came across yesterday. From The Intercept regarding white supremacist propaganda and how it has tripled on college campuses in 2017. And then also the last thing I'll be touching on today is the legacy of Madam C.J. Walker. She's going to be the profile that I go over today for Black History Month 2018. So that'll definitely be interesting as well. So let's get started. So Trump's budget, like I said, is an absolute disaster for poor and middle class Americans. His new budget proposal suggests deep cuts to the social safety net. Trump's budget would end the student loan forgiveness program. It would eliminate the Community Relations Service, which is a peacemaker office created by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It would cut Medicaid by $300 billion. It would cut disability programs by $70+ billion. It would cut spending to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It would cut student loan forgiveness programs. It would cut NASA space programs. And it would completely cut off NPR and PBS. And most importantly, and this is what people have focused on the most, it would cut SNAP benefits, also known as food stamps, by $213 billion. And that's over the next 10 years. Like, in terms of in 2019, by 2019 it will cut it by 17.2 billion. But by over the next decade, like I said, $213.5 billion cut from the SNAP program. So Trump's proposal centers around what was deemed a blue apron style system whereby the government, not SNAP recipients, but the government would decide what you will and won't eat. And that comes with a number of problems. First of all, some people might say, okay, yeah, it makes sense to say certain things are limited. I think that's how SNAP works now. There are certain things that you can't buy with food stamps. But this is taking it a step past that. This isn't just saying, you can't buy hot items or you can't buy this and that. This is saying that, no, we are going to decide what you can and can't eat. And a lot of people have rightfully brought up, well, what about people who need certain things? What about people who can't eat certain things? They don't really seem to have a way of getting around that issue. And then it seems to suggest that they will actually be delivering these items to people. So their argument for why they want to implement this is that, oh, well, we're saving money. Well, if you add in the amount of money that they're going to have to spend for delivering these items, they're not really going to be saving anything, honestly. So even if they say, okay, well, we won't deliver it, you might have to go to Walmart or go to whatever your local grocer is. Well, then that adds another problem. You know, what if you're talking about people with disabilities? What if you're talking about people who need help, who can't necessarily get around like that? It's just there are a lot of logistical problems that this is going to create, and it's not really solving anything. Quite frankly, it's taking away options. And so this new system would impact anyone who receives over $90 of benefits per month. So if you receive $100 a month in food stamps, which is nothing, okay, anybody trying to survive a month on $100 in groceries, good luck with that. But if you're receiving over $90 in benefits, then half of those benefits will be used for this, quote, blue apron system. So you're not even what you were getting before, which might not have even been a lot. Okay, half of that is now going to be lost, and it's going to go into these items that you might not even want, and that you might not even, be able to use that way. So this is an absolute disaster. You guys remember when Trump gave away the House with his tax cuts for the rich at the end of last year in 2017? You guys remember that? Well, now we know how they plan on paying for those cuts, because those tax cuts are going to have to come out of somebody's pockets. They plan on they plan on putting the burden of those cuts on the poor and working classes. That is now obviously clear, as if it weren't clear to you before. It's totally clear now. Hold on one second. I want to share my YouTube live stream with the public. Okay, so now that is shared, so that's cool. So, yeah, they gave away $1.5 trillion to the richest 1%. Okay, but they can't afford to make sure the American people are able to eat healthy and able to eat better. Okay, and this is a continuation of Trump's agenda. This is a continuation of Trump's SNAP agenda. He cut SNAP benefits last year, and now he's proposing even deeper cuts this year. And I said this on Twitter, and I'm going to repeat it here during this stream. The people who voted for Trump are going to be hurt the hardest. Do you know how many Trump voters in red states use SNAP? Almost 1.5 million veterans live in households that participate in the SNAP program. Okay? An estimated 23,000 active duty members in the military rely on SNAP. I mean, that in and of itself is insane. Why do soldiers who are putting their lives on the line, why do they need food stamps? But support the troops. Support the troops, and let's wave some flags. Let's make sure we don't take any knees. Let's make sure we stand up and respect the flag and put our hands over our hearts and sing the national anthem. All this BS all that jingoistic BS that they like to indoctrinate the public on, but yet and still, we can't pay soldiers enough so that they don't need food stamps. That's absolutely ridiculous. So I wanted to just bring that up, and it's a sign of how more and more is being taken away from the public to enrich people who don't need to be enriched any longer. And in case it's not clear to you now, and in case it hasn't been clear to you up until this point, the rich and the powerful, specifically the ones in power, in government, they just don't care about you. Especially the right wing, especially the Republicans. When it comes to stuff like this, they do not care about you. But you will see people in red states who will tribalistically vote for these people over and over and over again, even though it's akin to cutting off your own arm. They're losing more and more by supporting these politicians. But do they care? Apparently not. It's about being on Team Republican for a lot of these folks. Common sense has completely gone out of the window. And the Center on Budget, before I end this story, I'm just going to say, the Center on Budget says that SNAP lifts 8 million people out of poverty each year. The Trump budget wants to cut this important and effective anti-hunger program. Okay, that's how this needs to be viewed. It's an anti-hunger program. The Republicans in the right wing and the crony capitalists in power, they don't care about people starving. They really don't. And that's clear as day. But I'm going to continue on with the next story. So, on Tuesday, Israeli police recommended indictments in 2 corruption cases on suspicion of accepting bribes, fraud, and breach of trust for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. Okay, so I'm going to read this excerpt for you from Washington Post, from the Washington Post. It says, after more than a year of investigations, Israeli police said they believe there is sufficient evidence against the Prime Minister to indict him on suspicion of giving political favors for gifts worth around $280,000 in total, and cutting a deal with a newspaper publisher for favorable coverage. Israel's Attorney General must now decide whether to proceed with charges, a process that could take months. Now, let me stop right there. I'm skeptical that he will be charged. Okay, I certainly hope he is charged. But I know how deep his claws are in the Israeli government. Okay, he's been in power for like what, a decade now? And he's trying to maintain power. That sounds a lot. I don't know a lot about Israeli politics. I don't know enough about how their system works that way. But that sounds kind of dictatorial. I don't know how you can continue to be in power after 10 years. But like I said, I don't know everything about their system. I don't know what the term limits are like, and whether or not he can keep running over and over and over again. I would need to do research on that. But continuing with the article, the announcement will amplify a call for Netanyahu's opponents for him to step down and resign, and will likely complicate his ability to govern at a time when security officials are warning of an increasing likelihood of war on the country's northern border and impending economic collapse in the Gaza Strip. In a televised address to the nation, Netanyahu said Tuesday night that he would not give up without a fight. Of course not. Stressing his security credentials in striking a confident and sometimes combative tone as he maintained his innocence. He said, quote, "I will continue to lead Israel with responsibility and dedication and loyalty," end quote. He said, pointing out that only half of the police recommendations end with an indictment. He said, quote, "I'm sure that the truth will come to light." Yes, it definitely will. And I'm sure that also in the next elections, I will once again win your loyalty, end quote. Okay, so this recommendation or these recommendations come after Donald Trump made plans to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and plans to move the U.S. embassy there over the course of several years, which is a complete and total division from the norm with regards to U.S. policy on this issue, even including Republican presidents. Republican presidents haven't made this far right of a move regarding the U.S. embassy in Israel up until Trump, who is arguably, and I think this is true, I don't even think it's that arguable, so I don't know why I said that. Trump is easily the most corrupt president in most of our lifetimes, depending on how old you are. He's certainly the most corrupt president in my lifetime. So the fact that the most corrupt president in my lifetime, and arguably since the Nixon administration, since Richard Nixon himself, is the one pushing this agenda forward, I think speaks volumes. And of course, that happened in early December. This plan to move the U.S. embassy. What's interesting is that Netanyahu is attacking the Israeli police, who has been investigating his corruption for a while now. Not totally unlike how Trump is attacking the FBI for their investigation into his likely criminal activity. Birds of a feather really do flock together. Now, people are calling for Benjamin Netanyahu to step down. People are calling for Benjamin Netanyahu to step down. And I hope he does. I really do. I hope he does. Not only does he appear to be a criminal, and criminals should never be in power, first and foremost. But under Netanyahu, Israel has been an apartheid state. This can be proven a number of ways. I'm not going to go into that in this video because that's not the point of this live stream, to make that argument. I'm just disgusted by how much our political and media apparatus in America have completely sold out and don't tell the truth about Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people. So I look forward to see how this story plays out. Like I said, I don't really know whether or not he's actually going to be indicted, because power has a way of protecting power. And oftentimes, and you see this in America a lot too, not just America, you see it in a lot of petty authoritarian states. It takes a lot for the authoritarians to actually be brought to justice. You get people in power who want to protect the corrupt, even if that means covering up for the corrupt crimes that the corrupt people perpetuated on their citizens. And for a lot of people, protecting the corrupt means more than holding corrupt people accountable. And that's how authoritarianism sinks its teeth into weak democracies. And you look at Israel. Israel has a seemingly weak democracy. America definitely has a weak democracy. Turkey had a weak democracy before Erdogan, cemented his power and his authority. There are a lot of weak democracies around the world, and you're seeing the rise of right-wing fascism and right-wing authoritarianism in a lot of these weak democracies around the globe. Okay, so that's a great way to segue into the story that I recently came across last night, and I tweeted about it this morning. And it's a story from The Intercept, and the story is entitled, "While the Media Panicked About Campus Leftists, the Far Right Surged." Okay, and it's written by a woman named Natasha Leonard. And I checked out some of her previous articles, and I like some of I didn't read all of the articles, but I like some of the stuff that she writes about. And I'm going to read a little bit of this article to you guys, because people oftentimes talk about the normalization of white supremacy. Well, this article is a great example of how exactly that's happening. There's a powerfully true statement that is made in the last paragraph at the end of this article that needs to be echoed way more than it actually is. And I'm going to say it because a lot of other people aren't going to say it. But before I say it, I need to build up to it. So I want to read this article. It says, if a reader were to judge from popular media accounts, the biggest threat to university life and public discourse would be obvious. The left-wing students on campus fighting various forms of bigotry and other injustices. So she's saying, like, that's sort of the perception that's being put out there. From liberal broadsheets to Breitbart.com, commentators have taken up a straw man debate, largely shaped by the far right. This is totally true, okay? About campus free speech. She continues and she says tactics like, quote, no platforming and physically confronting neo-Nazis have come under the liberal microscope. The ethics questioned, the proponents decried as the real fascist forces on campuses. That sounds a lot like, and this is me talking now, that sounds a lot like how the right wing says, whenever people challenge racism, a lot of people on the right like to say, well, no, you're the real racist. Because to them, challenging racism is racism. So to a lot of these people as well, challenging fascism is real fascism. But I digress, so let me continue. As Adam Johnson, a contributing analyst for fairness and accuracy in reporting, told me, a November study he conducted found that the, quote, New York Times has dedicated 21 columns and articles to the subject of conservatives' free speech on campus, while only 3 covered the silencing of college liberals and leftists. So the New York Times has been really problematic when it comes to white supremacy. They wrote that puff piece about the white supremacist that I talked about on my channel, my YouTube channel. You can go watch that video. I literally wrote, like, in the title of the video, the normalization of white supremacy. And so, you know, this Intercept article is backing that up. 21 columns from the New York Times on the subject of conservative free speech on college campuses, and only 3 about the silencing of college liberals and leftists. But, and this is continuing, but recently released reports from a pair of prominent non-profit organizations tell a different story, focusing on the danger we should be addressing: the increased targeting of student spaces by neo-Nazis and white supremacists, and the violence those ideologies entail. This is very important. People like to separate the rhetoric from the actions. I think that is very dangerous, and that is very protectionist of white supremacy itself. So, hold on one second. Yeah, so someone said on my Periscope, and the Periscope live stream, someone said I agree, and that's because it's definitely true. And this whole thing is an incredibly one-sided and lopsided debate. It's an incredibly lopsided debate. But I am here at Black and Intellectual to present a counterbalance to this debate. So continuing with the article, it says the Anti-Defamation League, which the ADL is sometimes problematic, and the article touches on this later on, but for the sake of the article itself, I'm going to continue. It says the Anti-Defamation League reported that incidents of white supremacist propaganda on U.S. college campuses more than tripled in 2017. White supremacist propaganda tripled. It says groups doubling down on campus propagandizing include explicit neo-Nazis like the Florida-based Atomwaffen Division, which is basically a terrorist organization, as well as associations like Identity Europa, known for couching its unabashed racist message in thinly veiled panegyrics to protecting Western culture and posters bearing Michelangelo's David. It says, continuing, the alt-right is a movement of mostly young white males. Carla Hill, senior researcher for the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism, told me. She says, quote, they realize that for any movement to truly grow, they must reach young minds. And this segment of the white supremacist movement has been focused on doing that, end quote. The potential gravity of this surge was then underlined by a report from the Southern Poverty Law Center titled, quote, the alt-right is killing people. That was the name of the report. The name of the report from the Southern Poverty Law Center is the alt-right is killing people. And then the article goes on to say more than 100 people were killed or injured last year by perpetrators believed to be influenced by the racism and misogyny that defines the so-called alt-right, the center found. It said the report says, the report draws no direct link between the rise in white supremacist propaganda and the spike in white supremacist murder, but together they make clear that the threat of, quote, alt-right influence on young people, above all young white men, is anything but academic. Racist ideology is never free of violence, and neither is it in the case of the cosplaying Nazi-adjacent trolls of the alt-right. Let me repeat that. Racist ideology is never free of violence. This completely goes over the head of so many people on the left. Okay, people, and this is what I was saying a second ago, people like to separate violent rhetoric from violent action as if the rhetoric doesn't lead to the action. That is completely ahistoric. And anyone who has studied history knows this. The more and more you propagandize people with certain violent ideologies, the more likely those people are to commit violent acts. That is me saying that the Southern Poverty Law Center didn't say that. But that is me putting my 2 cents onto that study. So continuing, the Anti-Defamation League reported separately in November that white supremacists and other far-right extremists were responsible for, quote, 59% of all extremist-related activities in the United States in 2017. Up 20%, or up from 20% in 2017. So in 2016, I'm sorry. So in 2016, it was at 20%. And in 2017, it was up from 20% to 59%. While it's too soon for much dispositive social science on the link, it's difficult to consider all this data outside of the Trump era in American politics. It's definitely Trump related. We all, and this is me talking now, we already know that hate crimes have gone up since about 2015, 2016. But it's definitely continued to go upward under the Trump era because they are now emboldened. So continuing, over a year ago, there was no shortage of coverage predicting this sort of uptick in racist violence. The possibility of it occupied the liberal commentariat as Donald Trump's presidency loomed as an unlikely aberration. Opinion pages in late 2016 ran dozens of pieces wondering whether a Trump regime would be a truly fascist one, warning of emboldened white supremacy and neo-Nazism. I just said that. Continuing, the predictions have, to an extent, come to fruition. As the Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center reports show, the American far right is sucking up more and more oxygen and exacting an increasingly deadly toll on the country. Trump, for his part, has veered dangerously close to condoning the far right's violence. At the very least, he has sought to diffuse blame for it. Even as bigotry and racist violence have dug into their footholds over the course of the last year, many of the same liberal publications, once seemingly obsessed with the threat of fascism, have devoted more energy to decrying the students and staff organizing to expunge hate from their midst. So let me repeat that. Liberal publications, once obsessed with the threat of fascism, have now devoted more energy to decrying the students, the liberal students, the progressive students, and the progressive staff organizing against hate in their midst. Which gets at the root of the problem with the discussion of race on the left. There's a serious divide on the left around the discussion of race. So continuing, at New York Magazine, for example, centrist ideologue Jonathan Chait decried the, quote, repressive methods and slogans, end quote, of leftists chanting, shut it down. And then New York Times neoconservative Barry Weiss tweeted in horror that it was, quote, amazing to watch leftists turn free speech into a right-wing issue, end quote. In a New York Times op-ed, the president of the University of Oregon, Michael H. Schill, however you pronounce his name, said the campus, quote, crusade against fascism was, quote, misguided. The fight against fascism on college campuses is misguided? The people are apologizing for fascism now in order to prop up some sort of BS theoretical notion of protecting free speech. Continuing, after the right-wing, quote, Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, descended into violence, including the killing of a protester by a far-right rally-goer, Trump came under heavy criticism for blaming, quote, both sides. Everybody remembers that. Yet the mainstream media has too frequently adopted an almost identical stance when it comes to the balance of coverage between left-wing and right-wing demonstrators. In the month following the rally, America's six top broadsheet newspapers ran 28 opinion pieces condemning anti-fascist action, according to FAIR, but only 27 condemning neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and Trump's failure to disavow them. The Anti-Defamation League's November report evidences the flaws in this, quote, two sides position. The group found the far right was responsible, listen to this, for 71% of domestic extremist killings in 2017. But only 3% of killings were attributed to, quote, left-wing extremism. And even reaching this figure meant the Anti-Defamation League lumped together anarchists and black nationalists. So even if you start separating different groups of so-called left-wing extremism, it would even be smaller than 3%. They had to lump together anarchists, black nationalists, and other groups of people to get to that 3%. That's how small it is. That's how insignificant of a number it is. Yet and still, 71% of all domestic extremism, domestic terrorist killings in the United States in 2017 can be attributed to far-right organizations. But people want to pretend that there's somehow this balanced both sides argument where both sides are right, where both sides are wrong, and we need to hear out the far right. We need to come to agreements with the far right. Get the F out of here. Like, I'm not, I'm trying not to cuss like always in these live streams, but that's completely ridiculous. So let's continue. Quote, alt-right and neo-Nazi organizers were there in significant overlap. Make no secret of the rhetorical Trojan horse they used to infiltrate campus discourse. When white supremacist groups like the white nationalists of the National Policy Institute, along with Identity Europa, began targeting college campuses in the spring of 2016, they were explicit in their co-option of the liberal lexicon of safe spaces, quote-unquote safe spaces, and free speech protections. So like it says, they completely co-opted that notion. So safe spaces, were originally meant to protect groups of ethnic minorities on college campuses, right? So that they co-opted that term, and it says, quote, here it is, the birth of the free speech movement, end quote, pronounced far-right group Red Ice in May of 2016 at a small rally at the University of Berkeley, California. It was a potent combination, a cynical adoption of traditional liberal and leftist speech mixed with a genuine desire to be able to spread ideologies of hate in public without interference. Liberal centrists swallowed it whole. That is completely true. I cannot count the number of large leftist platforms who have completely bought into the notion, hook, line, and sinker, of the BS notion of social justice warriors and safe spaces. They've completely bought into the right-wing framing of this whole issue and this whole debate. I'm gonna reread this paragraph to you, and it says again. It starts out with a quote. Here it is, the birth of the free speech movement. And this was something that was said by a far-right group known as Red Ice in 2016 at a small rally at the University of Berkeley. So because they were getting a lot of pushback, likely from groups like Antifa, they said they used the pushback they were getting to say this is the birth of the free speech movement. Okay, it says it was a potent combination, a cynical adoption of traditional liberal and leftist speech, a traditional co-option of leftist speech mixed with a genuine desire to be able to spread ideologies of hate in the public without interference. Because what they really want, they don't want pushback. That's the real issue. They want to be able to spew white supremacist propaganda and white supremacist rhetoric, which could theoretically lead to violence without anybody pushing back against them. That's never going to happen. And it says again, liberal centrists swallowed it whole. Continuing, wittingly or not, it was a devilish sleight of hand. Neo-fascists relying on American liberalism's unmatched fetishization of protected speech in order to claim that the real fascists are in fact the ones who would see them silenced. Debates about whether to give a platform to far-right speakers and which ones are about ethics and tactics. These issues have been addressed at length, including by me, and we don't need to go over it again. Suffice to say that the anti-authoritarian Antifa groups criticized for violating the First Amendment rights of white supremacists are not in the habit of asking for government or institutional suppression of anything, let alone speech. That's a very important point to make. The decision to counter hate speech with confrontational protest is not a constitutional violation. even if certain tactics cross the line into illegality. And for the most part, anti-fascist strategy is to draw large protest crowds in order to shut down far-right gatherings, using numbers to reduce the likelihood of violence. It's also very important to point out, again, you don't hear a lot of people on the left, and I'm focusing on the left right now because I'm completely ignoring the right wing, because they are completely biased on this issue. They're the ones who are pushing a lot of this stuff. Okay, but you won't hear a lot of people on the left frame it this way. You will not hear them frame it this way, because like this article is pointing out, and like this author is rightfully pointing out, a lot of people on the left, a lot of fair weather liberals and fair weather progressives have bought into this argument, hook, line, and sinker. So they kind of have their own biases where they don't really like to talk about it from this perspective. And I'm gonna read it again. The decision to counter hate speech with confrontational protest is not a constitutional violation, even if certain tactics cross the line into illegality. And for the most part, anti-fascist strategy is to draw large protest crowds in order to shut down or snuff out far-right gatherings, using numbers to reduce the likelihood of violence. Continuing, all this comes amid a very real threat to progressive students and faculties on campus, to their lives, yes, but also to their livelihoods, and even, dare we say, their ability to speak out. When faculty members have come under attack and lose positions for their support of the international boycott against Israel, when events on the issue have been canceled, and Israel lobbyists push for banning boycott activity on campuses, no cottage industry of media outrage emerges to crow about pro-Palestinian groups' free speech. Damn it, that is so true. Where is the balance? Nobody is complaining about people who are criticizing Israel not having their free speech rights violated. Where are the New York Times think pieces about that, I wonder? No, non-existent apparently. Okay, how many of these people who make these videos have made as many videos criticizing leftist free speech being shut down on college campuses as they have about white supremacist speech? Continuing, the Anti-Defamation League, for its part, and this is the end of the article, 2 paragraphs left. The Anti-Defamation League, for its part, is a longtime foe of Palestine. And this is what I was talking about earlier about the ADL being a little funny style. They're right in this regard, but across the board, they have some problematic positions themselves. The ADL, for its part, is a longtime foe of the Palestinian rights movement, boycotts of Israel, and Antifa actions. But even with this history, the group is issuing dire warnings about the immediate dangers of the modern far right, something much of the media has still failed to capture with the necessary gravity. And this is what I was leading to. This is the whole thing I was leading up to. To be generous, the media focus on the free speech canard could reflect the reasonable assumption that readers already know emboldened white supremacy is bad. To be less generous and more realistic, liberal and centrist media institutions don't care as much about white supremacy as they claim to. White supremacy has never stood at odds with the American status quo. Its rise on college campuses is a disgrace, but in itself is not a disruption. Damn. I wish I had a sound cue of flames or gunshots firing, because this was like, that last paragraph was some fire. But if you want to read that article, like I said, it is on the Intercept.com. It is the first article on the Intercept as of right now, as of the making of this live stream. You might, depending on when you're listening to this, you might have to pull it up another way. So, that is all I'm going to say about that until the next time I bring this topic up. Let me just end it by saying you cannot separate the speech of a group of people who have a history of violence and a history of genocide and advocating for genocide and low-key condoning genocide. You're talking about people who big up Adolf Hitler. You cannot separate the rhetoric from those people and the propaganda that those people espouse from the violence that stems from a lot of that stuff. Charlottesville is a perfect example of that. Charlottesville was billed as a free speech rally. And it was one of the most, and honestly, it might have been the most violent rally of 2017. And honestly, one of the most violent rallies I've ever seen in my life. But you're going to have people who continue to try to make that argument as ahistorical as it is. So, here is the last story. It is Black History Month, as we all know. And I want to talk for a moment about Madam C.J. Walker. She was born Sarah Breedlove on December the 23rd, 1867. She became known as Madam C.J. Walker. She was an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and an activist. She championed all sorts of things, such as anti-lynching legislation, along with Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois and some of her other contemporaries. She became the world's most successful female entrepreneur during her time, even eclipsing the wealth of many white females. Madam C.J. Walker made her fortune by developing and marketing a line of beauty and hair care products for Black women through the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. She had a passion for skin and hair care because she began experiencing hair loss at a young age. Hair loss was a very common problem at the time because people found it difficult to bathe and wash their hair as often as we do today because most lacked access to things like indoor plumbing, central heating, and electricity. Sarah began experimenting with different products and home remedies, eventually creating her own shampoos and hair treatments. Her business was so successful that she was soon selling her products across the United States. Sarah's daughter, or Madam C.J. Walker, her daughter Aaliyah ran a mail order business from Denver, while Madam C.J. Walker herself traveled the states, finally settling in Indianapolis, where she opened her own factory. So this sister was doing big things. After establishing her headquarters there, she expanded her company internationally to Jamaica, to Cuba, to Costa Rica, to Panama, and to Haiti. Her company employed thousands of people, including many African American women, and was the largest African American owned business in the nation. And I read, I don't have it right in front of me, but I read this article talking about how around 1910 she tried to get like a loan of $50,000 from Booker T. Washington, and he didn't give it to her, but he gave, he offered his well wishes. I thought that was kind of funny. Well, not funny. I don't mean funny from a hilarious point of view, but funny from a strange point of view. Because this was a man who used to talk about Black people owning businesses and things like that, and it's mighty strange how when a woman had the most successful business among Black women in the country and among Black people period in the country, how this brother didn't want to help her out. I've always thought Booker T. Washington was a funny style individual, funny style character, but I just wanted to put that out there. Not only was Madam C.J. Walker Not only was she able to create an incredibly successful business against all odds, she also used her wealth to oppose racism and support institutions to assist African Americans. She said that she wanted to be a millionaire not for herself, but for the good she could do with it. Besides lecturing on these issues at various conventions, she also made the largest contribution to save the House of Frederick Douglass. She donated money to the NAACP, the YMCA, and to black schools, organizations, individuals, orphanages, and retirement homes. She spent $10,000 every year for the education of young black men and women. She encouraged political activism in her employees. She joined the leaders of the NAACP in their efforts to support legislation to make lynching a federal crime, like I mentioned earlier, even going herself to the White House to petition in favor of anti-lynching legislation. Okay, so Madam C.J. Walker was an incredible woman, and she was ahead of her time, and she wouldn't be matched for a very long time in terms of the amount of wealth she accumulated. It probably wouldn't be until after the civil rights era was over and the integration era came into effect that you would get a woman or a black person, period, with the amount of wealth that Madam C.J. Walker accumulated. But that's all I wanted to say about Madam C.J. Walker. Check me out on Friday at 12 p.m. noon. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, I will be live streaming Black Panther. Well, not live streaming Black Panther. I will be doing a review of the Black Panther movie. It will be a spoiler review because by then the movie would have already been out. And everybody else's spoiler reviews are going to be up. So I'm not going to do a spoiler-free review and a spoiler review, which is why I'm going to leave that probably for the last thing I'll talk about on Fridays, just for people who might not want to hear spoilers. But that is all. Check out my blog at www.blackandintellectual.com. Follow me on YouTube. Just type in Black and Intellectual in the search engine on YouTube and I will come up. My profile will come up and you can follow me there. Like this video, retweet this video, and I will be with you guys. You guys will be able to check me out and listen to the next live stream, like I said, on Friday, 12 p.m. See you later.